This is the ripple effect of well-being in work and life. I'm Dr. Ken Thompson, here with Dr. Stephanie Romero.
On this show, we explore how holistic well-being practices can transform our individual lives and our collective capacity for care.
We're bringing you the science, the stories, and the specific practices that reduce stress and build resilience in our homes, our offices, and our communities.
We're talking to people to see how their perspectives, practices, and work are creating a ripple effect for a better world.
Thanks for joining us.
I am so excited for today's conversation with Dr. Adam Lobel, a philosopher, eco-psychologist, and meditation teacher who practices at the very threshold of ecology, Buddhist philosophy, and social change. Adam is a deeply respected scholar practitioner who focuses on Dzogchen Tibetan Buddhism and contemporary cultural therapeutics. But he isn't just practicing on a cushion, he's on the front lines of environmental justice. He is a guiding teacher for One Earth Sangha, a Green Faith Fellow, and the co-founder of Four Elements Strategy, an ecological consulting organization. Adam lives right here in Pittsburgh, where he actively works to protect local lands from the petrochemical industry. Today, we're diving into his revolutionary new framework, the Four Fields, which weaves all of these practices together to help us navigate the social and ecological upheavals of our time. So, Adam, this is particularly delightful for me because you and I have a very long, I don't even know how many years. When did you move to Pittsburgh?
2009. But it was not that long after that we were
Exactly.
already practicing together.
Exactly. So a long relationship of based on practice. And just for the listeners, Adam was my meditation teacher. So I'm thrilled to have you and so grateful that you're taking the time to be with us.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here and to have been part of your journey and the journey of Awaken. And
Yes.
it feels just right to be having this conversation today.
Yeah, maybe I should mention you were one of my founding board members as well. So we are intricately connected in many ways.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, so I always, even though I probably know this story, our listeners don't know this story, I always love to start these conversations with asking people how they found their practice and hearing that journey story.
Yeah. Well, I was a seeker when I was, 15, 16 years old. Interested in movies and stories. It was always the Gandalf figure or the Yoda figure or the shaman in the background that was more interesting to me in some ways than the main heroine or hero. And so I think I was always drawn towards some wisdom archetype or something like that. And that led me to travel in Japan when I was 15, and I was very interested in Japanese culture. And then I also was traveling through South America when I was 16 and spent some time with some indigenous communities and populations there. So, yeah, I spent some time traveling in South America, living with a small indigenous community. I was seeking some guidance, some wisdom, something outside of the world that I was raised within, which was a, fairly familiar upper middle class world where financial success and getting married and having kids was, that was like the goal of everything. And I just knew there was something more needed for me and for our world. And I was quite concerned about environmental issues as a young person. And so if you combine all that together, by the time I reached high school, I I was also starting to really feel some fear, anxiety, quite a grandiose level of concern for like my future in the world, and was really looking for not just a practice, but a community, a vision, something that could help with the future of life on Earth. And it was in that context that my friend in high school, his father had the Shambhala book in his library. And it's called Shambhala, The Sacred Path of the Warrior by Chogyam Trungpa. And I started leafing through this book, and it described this vision of an enlightened society that humans could create not just a good society, but an enlightened, a kind of utopian civilization. And the archetype was of a warrior, and the spiritual warriors who could come together and create this good world, and that meditation practice was how we trained our hearts and minds. And I mean, this was just like made for me. And all of the pieces of the puzzle were there. There was an indigenous element, there was a samurai Bushido martial art element, there was deep meditation, there was social vision, there was an ecological dimension. So when I was 16, I really fell in love with that Shambhala lineage, which is rooted in Tibetan Buddhism and Tibetan culture, and began to practice. And I went during my senior year. There's in the Shambhala tradition, they have a practice called Datun, which is, as you know, but it's a whole month of meditation. Da means moon, Dawa, and Tun is sit. So it's a month-long sit. So at age 17, I showed up at this small meditation center called Karma Choling, which still exists in northern Vermont, and did a whole month of meditation. And the wonderful man on the phone when I called to sign up, he said, "Well, have you done a lot of meditation before?" I said, "Not really. I've practiced some Aikido, but I've never really meditated." And he said, "Well, usually people build up to a whole month of 10 hours a day of meditation." And I said, "No, no, no, I can do it. I can do it." And was quite, ambitious and arrogant and driven, and showed up. And that first day, I thought, this is going to be a really hard month. This is a lot of silence and stillness. But I sat and learned a lot over that month. And some of what I learned really was working through the beginning challenges of a meditation practice, but I was in a container where I really couldn't run away. And so I left that month with a strong meditation practice, and I'm very grateful for it.
I'm just kind of chuckling to myself when you say I was in a container when I couldn't run away.
Yeah,
Because I just feel like so many times, as a meditation instructor, you're working with people on how to just stay,
that's
right?
right.
How to
Yeah.
just stay. And you had this kind of immersion experience very early on in just how to stay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And those of us who do have a regular practice know that when you do just stay and you find a way to do that in a way that's gentle and kind to yourself, and you're not forced, but there is a groundedness, there is a trust really that comes over you, that so much happens that is effortless and is very joyous actually when you find a way to stay. But learning that path can be a real challenge, and that was not an easy month for me. I was very happy when it was over.
Happy that it was over, but then you had a very long, deep relationship with Shambhala until not so long ago. And have since then kind of moved away from that for a whole variety of reasons. So I don't know if there's, we have lots to talk about. But in the middle of being one of the people in that leadership role, because you were very high in the leadership of Shambhala, and that we'll just say that whole thing collapsed, that whole thing fell apart. I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that experience, how you navigated it, what it meant for you, and how it kind of put you on the next thing, right?
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, there's so much to explore about it, so much to explore for me personally, for American Buddhism or Western modern Buddhism, for Vajrayana, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, for visions of spiritual and social movements coming together. So we could talk for months on end learning the lessons of that collapse. But yeah, so after that first month of meditation, when I was 17 years old, I really did dedicate myself fully to the Shambhala tradition and worked my way through the Tibetan Buddhist path of study and practice and ethics, and the Shambhala warrior path, which is really about learning to open your heart and your awareness without the cocoon of habitual patterns and fear. And was able to orient my whole life really around studying Buddhism. So I went to college and studied Buddhism, and then graduate school and did a master's degree and PhD in religious studies and philosophy. And meanwhile, was working my way through this very hierarchical, clear path of the Shambhala tradition, which for a white, cis, highly educated male who's kind of used to moving through hierarchies, it was just perfect for me and my embodiment. And I became very close with the main teacher, Sakyang Mipham Rinpoche, who was Chogyam Trungpa's son, and he and I were very, very close, and was very involved for over 20 years with developing the Shambhala tradition and the community. And eventually, my job was actually to train a lot of the teachers and write the curriculum for many of the meditation centers. And through that work, I was invited to be on the board. And so I was on the board, the international board, and developing the curriculum and close to the main teacher when the Me Too movement swept across the world. And in that context, 2017, 2018, the history of patriarchy and sexual abuse within the Shambhala tradition came to light for everyone. And it was excruciating to try to navigate that for many of us, you too, Stephanie. It was a really, really difficult time. And of course, the most pain and the most violence was towards women who were objects of sexual abuse, and that objectification and in a patriarchal context was just caused so much harm for so many people. And all of that really arose, um, and I was in a position of leadership to try to manage my various loyalties, commitments, relationships, the love of my teacher, of the tradition, of the whole Shambhala vision, but also reckoning with the fact that, yeah, this is not going to be the way to create an enlightened society. And it was very difficult for me to admit that to myself. So I went through quite a few years of real destabilization and uncertainty, along with thousands of other people who either left the tradition or the context of their practice changed dramatically. And I resigned from my kind of formal positions and titles, along with many other acharyas and leaders, and the whole board resigned. So it was excruciating and really I guess some kind of both midlife crisis. I was in my early 40s, so some kind of early midlife crisis. I didn't go out and get a red Corvette or anything, um, but I did feel a real break in my identity. But also a spiritual crisis, a dark night of the soul, as John of the Cross would say. Um, and and as your question was hinting at, Stephanie, I think a lot of what that also allowed for was a open canvas of a fresh start as much as possible. Um, but that also included reckoning with my own, what was it in me as a man and as uh, a teacher, as a white person? Why did I participate in a patriarchal context? What was it about, me that I needed to heal, learn, reckon with? So it's been a long process of unlearning. It was also an opportunity to ask, well, now what? What? I've learned a lot. I know that I have, quite a bit of experience as a meditator, as a scholar, as a leader in this community. What do I care about? Where is enlightened society now? Where do I turn my heart, my attention, my efforts, and in what way? And out of that have been developing another, let's say, body of practices or teachings and really sets of questions that I care most deeply about. And we could talk about that if you'd like.
Of course, but I guess I just want to highlight um, something that was, the thing that caught me and brought me into Shambhala was the vision of enlightened society as well, which you know. And that was one of the driving forces that spurred me to create Awaken Pittsburgh. So I feel in some way forever grateful for those teachings and that inspiration that connected with me very deeply. But I also, just want to say I appreciated you and your courage in that really difficult moment to resign and to step away. And I just, because I don't know if all the listeners caught, like you'd spent 20 years of your life giving your whole self to this organization and teacher, right? And what a difficult thing, what a difficult thing. So just, I actually feel appreciation for that because I know how hard it was for you. I mean, I can imagine. I don't know, no. But I saw how hard it was for you. I was alongside you and the courage to just totally reinvent, right? Which is where we want to go next.
Right, right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think just important to highlight when these things happen and we get sucked in because we are human and we do, right? The courage that it takes to because not everyone stepped away,
That's
right?
true. I mean, that's
Yeah.
true. And I just want to say that it really, really wasn't courage. It was actually more fear. And um and I really just felt totally spent and didn't know how to proceed. So I'm glad that it seemed like courage to you, but the experience was one of really feeling like I don't know, who I am, where to
Right.
go, what to trust. So it felt very, very groundless. Yeah,
Yeah, but I guess I would say the courage was staying with the groundlessness and not going back to do the same old, same old.
right. That's true. Yeah.
That's the courage, is you stayed with the groundlessness instead of saying, I'm digging in my heels, I'm sticking by these people even though it's really apparent that they did huge things wrong, you
Mhm.
know, and you didn't. So that's what I appreciate. And I know how because I felt it for a few years afterwards, how disruptive it was to all of our practices and on a very deep level identity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that recreating, right, you have been exploring things like psychoanalysis, focusing, the diamond approach, different ways to work with eco dharma, and there's so much and it's so rich, right? So I would love for you to just maybe talk to us about what feels really important in helping you get to where you are now and maybe even describing what your work is right now. And I know that all of these threads, including the Dzogchen teachings, and what you named earlier in your environmentalism, like somehow you found a way to weave a beautiful tapestry in what you're doing. So I know we don't have a lot of time to talk about all of it, but what feels important to mention and name and I would invite people listening. We can put some links in the notes to go on and explore some of these things if they feel more interesting. But yeah, what would you like to talk about in that path from the ending of Shambhala to what you're doing right now
Yeah.
with four fields.
Yeah. Well, as said, in some ways, um, the challenge is when you open yourself up to all of the things that so many of us love and are committed to, the earth, justice, deep spiritual experience, healing, political movements, good emotional and psychological support, embodiment and somatic awareness. Um, the various mystical traditions from around the world, different contemplative practices, I mean, it starts to feel like, okay, how do you possibly hold all of those dimensions without going crazy or feeling overwhelmed or feeling like a dilettante, like you're just having little tight tastes of things. And that's how I felt in that moment of real groundlessness. I still felt so much love and commitment to goodness and wisdom and compassion and to the earth and to people and to the more than human world. And I was trying to find that inner compass to navigate through the labyrinth that is our world. And it's not like those loves and questions were happening in a vacuum. They're happening in the moment when you have this rising authoritarianism. In the United States, you have MAGA and Trump and white nationalism and techno-fascism emerging. You have climate change and climate overshoot, where our dominant systems are in total denial about the obvious impacts of a warming globe. You have repeated cycles of racist violence and abuse of power in white supremacist countries. You have a reckoning with colonialism. And while I was going through whatever I was going through in my own personal reflection, we had Black Lives Matter erupting. We had First Fridays and the whole movement around climate and youth with Greta Thunberg. I mean, it was a very intense time. There were days here in Pittsburgh where we would wake up and the entire sky and air was just filled with thick smoke from burning forests in Canada. New York City was orange. San Francisco was bright red. I mean, fires in Los Angeles. I'm going through the list because I want your listeners to connect in some way, not just with my story, but with a shared story, right? That we're all in a place of civilizational impasse and the stakes are very high and the poly crisis is real. So in the midst of that, I was asking, what does one do? How do we collectively respond? And one of the elements that felt most clear to me was that the earth, the more than human world, is often, the last to be considered. The plants, the animals, the forests, the coral reefs, the oceans, the climate itself. And I felt such a deep, my whole life, this spiritual and ethical longing and calling towards our earth as a primary teacher. So I knew that going forward, whatever I was going to do would be really inclusive and in connection with, in kinship with the planet, with the living earth community. So I actually did some training in eco-psychology and found a wonderful mentor in radical eco-psychology named Andy Fisher. I began to do work with the Animas Valley Institute, which is Bill Plotkin is the founder, which brings a Jungian depth psychology analysis and in relationship with the earth. And they do like quests and fasts out on the land. So I brought a lot of my prayer and longing and question out onto the land, the desert, the mountains, spent a lot of time alone. And I knew I wanted this earth-based dimension. And as you know, Stephanie, I also got very involved with direct environmental action here in Western Pennsylvania, huge petrochemical build out, fracking, and just the continued violence of the fossil fuel industry. And so I became more involved with that direct environmental action work here and started bringing actually people out to the Shell petrochemical plant that's a half hour outside of Pittsburgh and bearing witness to what the petrochemical industry really is. It's often hidden from us and invisibilized. So that realm, that ecological earth-based realm, is one of the four fields. So there's an ecological field. And the question there for many of us is how do we practice with the elemental materiality of this earth as inseparable from our spiritual practice? and environmental justice and direct ecological action and nature-based practices are quite rich. It's its own whole universe. So I knew that I needed a whole field of practice and study and reflection and ethics to connect with that field, which was also part of the Shambhala tradition, a very old indigenous lineage of connecting with the natural and elemental world that we were trained in. So I wanted to continue some of that work as well. So that's one field, and maybe I'll pause there and see if you want to, ask anything, or we could stay with that for a moment.
I guess my curiosity is I know some of the Shambhala practices that we worked with, and I also know the bearing witness practices because we've done those together. But is there any example of a practice that you might want to give? Because I think people listening might not understand what an earth-based practice is.
Yes. Well, first of all, I think all of our ancestors at some point, going back through the generations, had probably more of a rootedness in place for at least some period of time and knew the names of the trees and the uses, the medicinal uses of the bark and the herbs, and had a relationship with the local rivers and watersheds and the animals, and knew the seasonal cycles. So there's an old and natural intimacy that our bodies, our animal bodies, have with the earth and with our watersheds and with our seasons. So some of this, as a spiritual practice, simply means rediscovering, remembering that kinship with place and with a more than human living earth community, um, simply by going out and what I call the three S's. The first S is slowing down, where the speed of our hyper-productive capitalist lives is just can be so overwhelming that there isn't the slowness, the steadiness to actually even notice the communication coming from the tree outside your window, the squirrels, the birds, the deer showing up. So the first S is to slow down. The second S is sense, to use our senses, our sensual bodies. And a lot of times, religion, spirituality, even mindfulness can sometimes sound like, leaving the body behind or not being attached to the senses or pleasures. And this is a very different approach from that. This is an approach that really wants to root our mindfulness, our spirituality in the sensual field, in the somatic. And when we do touch and smell and taste and listen and really make contact with a fern in the forest floor or the bark of a tree, or for that matter, really see and hear the sound of a giant 356-acre plastic plant, or really smell and breathe in the toxic air. That sensual connection awakens a different relationship with this field, this ecological field. So slow and sense. And then the third S is soften, or even sadness. Sadness, not in the sense of depression, but a kind of a vulnerability or a satiation. And so I often use these three S's, and the softening is sometimes the most emotional, the most powerful. And the way I experience it is it's almost like when I go out on the land, even walking in the city, or certainly if I'm in the mountains or an old growth forest or in the rainforest or the desert. Sometimes at first it feels like there's a armoring or a protection that I want to keep my heart, my body, my mind from really, really opening to a place. And soften means you kind of pass through, you soften that armoring, you melt that defendedness. And then the earth comes to life so consistently. It's just so vital, the type of signs and communication that start to show up. So I use these three S's as an example of the type of uh, ecological practices that we can learn. And you can hear in them very core mindfulness perspectives.
Yeah, thanks for that.
So the next field is more psychological and emotional and imaginal, working with imagination and dream. So this field really comes from the recognition that all of us have had that our feelings, our emotions, our identities shape our lives and our world so much. And during a time of polycrisis and ambiguity and volatility and impasse, there is a, shared, there's different manifestations of it, but there's a shared sense of real instability in our world right now. And whether that's coming from political instability and violence towards immigrants, climate, refugees, um, fear around AI and technological developments, political, we can go on and on. But how are we healing that? How are we facing that? How are we working with the ecological anxiety? I mean, in some ways, it's astounding how much ignoring is happening for all of us every day, myself included. This cognitive dissonance of, what am I going to have for breakfast when you know that there's, so much starvation and suffering and genocide and violence. Uh, and that cognitive dissonance leads to a moral injury and an inner quaking and shutting down that is happening around the human species. So precisely at a moment when what we need is our love, our care, our commitment, our bravery, our creativity, our vision, our imagination, instead, oftentimes we just feel increasingly just pushed down or unsure or silent. And this field, the psychological field, is of course spiritual psychological, but it's less about calm. It's less about peace, and it's more about a really valuing our emotional life and being curious about it. And here I'm very influenced by the diamond approach and this sense of a living inquiry or an alchemy of freedom, where anything we encounter emotionally can be metabolized, that you can meet it, explore it. This is about curiosity, an open-ended curiosity to really feel into our experience, even the feelings of guilt or numbness that we might have about the polycrisis. Actually, that's a feeling. That's something to explore, to get to know. So here we really work with a lot of inquiry and curiosity, open-ended curiosity about our living experience. So I teach practices and engage practices. I have a counseling practice where I meet with individuals and we use a lot of inquiry methods based on focusing, a more somatic inquiry, or diamond approach inquiry, which is a little bit more imaginal, or bringing in explicitly imaginal methods from creative visualization. And here I also draw on some of my training in the Vajrayana tradition that utilizes the capacity of the consciousness to actually not just imagine visually, but to fully sensualize an immersive environment where different qualities can be brought forth. And we can dream, we can vision. A course that I taught with one of our shared friends and colleagues, Fitzhugh Shaw, a year or 2 years ago. We did a whole course on Elon Musk, and we're going to do another one coming up on Peter Thiel. And why would we spend 6 weeks with these gentlemen? In part because we were curious about unpacking their imagination, their vision for the future. And the Silicon Valley tech world does have a vision, a story for what they think the future, not just on Earth, but in our whole solar system, is supposed to be. And I feel that part of the work in this field, the psychological and visionary field, is to unfold, discover, imagine, create future possibilities much sexier than anything that they're offering. Much more inviting and inclusive and truly visionary. That there's something actually quite dull about the imagination coming out of a lot of the tech world right now. I mean, they're masterful designers, and we can give credit where credit is due in terms of their technological achievements. But in terms of a really beautiful, inspiring vision that includes the wonder of this earth and our bodies and our life and brown and black people and trans people and all people, they're really lacking. And so I think part of this field is re-inspiring the visionary dimensions of spirituality.
I love your description of this, and I also love the connection to, I love Vajrayana practice, so I love the connection there as well. And for folks who may not know, that the Vajrayana practice is very rich in imagining yourself as another entity or being that has qualities that you aspire to have. And so this is yeah, beautiful practice to help us break out of our own self-imposed limitations in our thinking and conceiving of ourselves and understanding that, we don't have to be limited. And so that's just a very beautiful description. The other thing that I really resonated with is this idea of moral injury. I think so many of us feel guilt for our incarnation in this world now, in this moment, and consumption. And like we're all on that kind of hamster wheel that it feels impossible to get off. I just read an article this morning about clothing and microplastics, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't even like buy clothing,
Yeah.
because every time I do the wash, apparently I'm putting microplastics out into the world.
Yeah.
So it's a really challenging thing.
It's challenging ethically, morally and psychologically and
Yeah,
spiritually. And I think many spiritual teachers haven't even developed the language and the perspective to
that's right.
hold that complexity. Just as a little side story, I was just a visiting professor at the University of Virginia, and I offer something that I call the climate confession booth, which is based on your old your old family lineage of the Catholic tradition and the confession practice. And but I specifically create a space where I'm sitting in a little room, and one by one, people come in and share all of that guilt and all of the confusion that we all hold, the anger, the fear, or sometimes the numbness of like, actually, I know what's happening conceptually, but I don't feel it. I honestly don't. I'm not even hurting. And that can be very, very painful. So there's layer after layer of complexity there that we work on in this field.
Yeah. Well, I want to invite you to get to the next field.
Yeah, yeah. So the last two fields in a way are more simple. The next field is really the field of meditation practice itself and meditative awareness. And this is different from the psychological and the emotional and the visionary, because here we're really resting back and back into awareness itself, the non-dual, boundless ocean of awareness, which is free of content, it's non-conceptual, it's the capacity to sense, to cognize, to feel. So it's not the patterns and shapes, it's not all the color and energy of the psychological that we were just talking about. This is the field that's just the very capacity to sense and to be aware in the first place. And what's amazing about this field is it's completely effortless, it's totally natural and uncontrived. None of us are better at it than anyone else. This is just what, our the gift of being conscious. This is our capacity to sense and feel. And I've really in some ways with this field, this is my way to pay homage to especially the Dzogchen lineage, that I've learned so much from, and that you have learned so much from, Stephanie, and this beautiful tradition of effortless awareness, luminous mind. And I've been approaching meditation practice in an increasingly formless and effortless way. So less even about breath regulation or placing the mind on an object of attention, and more just this letting the mind loose, this kind of carefree quality that can be very, very powerful. Now, here the trick is obviously, and I am, and you are committed to ethics and justice and to people and to this earth. So the question here becomes, how does this field of open awareness not simply remain a kind of bypassing, a way to check out amidst all the challenge? And this is a real danger, even in the Buddhist communities that I've been part of, where, it feels so good. It's so great to be able to allow your whole being to let go, to just be. But how does that not become a form of bypassing? And here I think it's very helpful to recognize how all of our minds and attention are caught in this attention economy. That a big part of the battles on our planet are battles for our attention. Something that our shared friend Michelle King shared with me years and years ago. She said, the next war on this planet is going to be a war for our attention. And here we are, where our smartphones and our technologies and artificial intelligence and media all over the place are vying to capture, literally capture seconds of our mind and the dopamine hits that are released when we engage certain images and sensations and volatile emotions. So if we want to navigate the polycrises, cultivating this capacity for an open, relaxed, attentional field is very, very powerful. And I think going forward as a human species, it's something we need to really take care of, because if we don't have ways to train our children and ourselves in this sensitive, open ease of being, then we really are in trouble, because it's the nourishment that we need, the rest that we need.
I think that last piece you hit it on the nail on the head, is that kind of nature of mind practice that you were naming, that sitting with open awareness, the way that we feel really good, whatever our practice is, it doesn't have to be an open awareness practice. That's the way to recharge the batteries to get back in, that's really what it is. And um there is always the risk of bypassing, even with breath focused awareness. I remember working with a student once who was like, well, whenever I get that nervous feeling, I just go to the breath. And I said, what would happen if you just breathed with that nervous feeling?
Yeah.
Bring it together. What if you breathe so that you can hold the nervous feeling
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
sit with the nervous feeling, right? Instead of breathing to get rid of. And I
Yeah.
think that's the challenge, is like, do the practice, dip yourself fully in the feel good, right? Because it is beautiful and relaxing and lovely. And even, some of the imagery of the Vajrayana is so beautiful. And I'm just thinking Vajrasattva practice. I just love that so much. It just feels like such a release. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like you're getting rid of everything, all of that. It's beautiful and wonderful, and we need it. And how do we use that then to hold all the difficulty?
That's right. Yeah. And it's such a simple example you just shared of breathing with, inviting it into the context of our practice, not just escaping it. And, I should say I am quite critical of the ways that much of the contemplative marketplace is operating. I do think there's a huge amount of escapism and bypassing, and kind of a wellness industry approach, which of course we understand why. When there's so much anguish, we want to escape it. So this is, like you said, there's always going to be this challenge. We're never going to be free from the question about bypassing. And we also don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, as it were. These practices, these lineages of contemplative practice and Zen and Dzogchen and Mahamudra and Advaita Vedanta and Theravada traditions. I mean, these are so powerful. And there's so much wisdom, but I do think they need to be reinvented and recontextualized. And that's some of what I'm trying to do with the four fields. And I know it's some of the work that you do with Awoken.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I'm so painfully aware that here in our country, some of that reinventing is just soaked in capitalism.
Hmm.
So there is a kind of need to make it fit our modern life. And I don't even like that's a whole nother conversation. I just want to name it and then maybe we want to go straight to your fourth item because we won't get it. But I
Well,
just
no, I
really
think
wanted to name that.
thank you. Thank you. It's such an important point. So, often I describe this as like the Scylla and the Charybdis, at least in my experience, to use an image from Ulysses. But on the one hand, you've got this extreme uh, of old traditions, let's say patriarchal, often patriarchal traditions that are not able to meet the realities of a changing climate or issues of modern injustice and can seem very, very lost, actually, or not in direct connection, not relevant, even though they're full of profound teachings and practices that we want to really honor. But on the other extreme, you have, like you said, this kind of capitalist wellness industry attempt to reinvent. And there, it can actually be more like a supplement, as something Slavoj Žižek said years ago, that Western Buddhism can be like just a supplement to capitalism, a perfect ideology and set of practices to just lubricate the wheels of neoliberal capitalism. So that's the other extreme. And when I say reinvent, or what I'm seeking with the four fields, is neither of those extremes. And I know that that's what you're also committed to.
Yeah, I didn't mean to imply you were doing that. I just see it happening. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
It,
I
it
am doing that. I mean, that's the thing. Like we all, I don't want to be doing that,
yeah, but
but
we're all sucked in.
we all get sucked in, and
Yeah.
it's easy to proclaim, oh, we're somehow free of it and righteous, and
We
we're the
can't be
good
free of
ones.
it in this system. You
Yeah,
can't be because we have to have money.
yeah.
We have to have
Okay.
money to survive. Yeah. It's a very big challenge. It's a very big challenge that we are all simmering in. Yeah.
Well, and that maybe brings us to the last field, and I'll just briefly say this is the field of real open groundlessness. I call it the space field. This is having to do with the Buddhist teachings of emptiness. And it's more ontological in the sense of a question of being or non-being, real inquiry into what is real, what ground do we have to stand on, what are our foundations, or maybe foundationlessness. And I find this important enough to warrant its own field because sometimes the language of awareness can almost take over the real challenge of wrestling with and reckoning with a groundless universe. And this can be difficult territory because there's often a real need for foundations and meaning in our life. Yet the deeper we look, the more it's difficult to find anything solid. So this last field is really about wrestling with and opening to the most profound freedom or the mystical silence beyond knowing and beyond concept. So that's the last field.
When you were speaking just now, some of the work of Pema Chodron was flashing in my mind of dealing with groundlessness and
Yep.
needing to let go of our desire to make everything firm and concrete. And I mean, Changyung Trungpa, of course,
Yep.
Rinpoche, of course, was her teacher and taught the same thing. But Yeah,
Yeah, but
this is,
Emma has been such a skillful voice of
yes.
encouraging to open to that uncertainty. And I think now one of my main teachers, who I consider one of my main teachers, is Vanessa Mochada de Oliveira from the Hospicing Modernity, the Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures, where what she names is not just the kind of ontological uncertainty or existential groundlessness, but literally facing the collapse of whole civilizations. And we are at a moment where many of us are looking at our systems, our climate, our ecology, and wondering how we get through and what does it mean to get through. So there's a deep kind of socio-political, civilizational scale level of groundlessness as well.
Well, just because we are facing a time limit that is real, I want to just shift us to closing and ask you, is there anything that you didn't touch on that you were hoping to say or share in this conversation?
Well, there's so much, but one, I just want to name the important work that I've been doing with One Earth Sangha, and we've just developed a teacher training. It's a certificate program for modern mindfulness teachers and Buddhist teachers who want to bring climate, environment, polycrises, reflections into their work, but need some support. And what does it mean to really wrestle with these issues? Because it is different to take on, let's say, climate change, civilizational impasse. It's different from working with a divorce or the challenges of life and death. So this is a training through One Earth Sangha, and I wanted to give a shout out to Kristen Barker and One Earth Sangha and this really powerful teacher training that we've developed. It has Vanessa Machado de Oliveira as a voice, Bayo Okomolafe, Dugald Hine, Sister True Dedication, Britt Ray, just some incredible teachers that are working with us.
Awesome. I'm glad you put that little plug in, and we'll try to make sure there's a link down in the liner notes so that people can follow through and take a look at that if they're interested. I've been taking notes on some of the people that we've been mentioning, so hopefully we can get those links in there as well. Um, as a wrap up, I always love to end by asking my guests if they have a resource or a book. Like if people are interested in this topic and what you've been talking about, is there something they could turn to kind of get them started? Where would they want to start? What would they want to read or explore?
Yeah, well, since I just began or was speaking about it, I'll just name Hospicing Modernity, which I think has almost become a modern classic. But if you have not read it, Hospicing Modernity by Vanessa Machado de Oliveira, it's North Atlantic Press, and her most recent book is Outgrowing Modernity. And that, I think, is a very powerful twofold to bring into any work on mindfulness.
Perfect. Awesome. I feel like we're going to have to schedule a part two, Adam, because I have like 4 questions we didn't even get to.
Well, we covered a lot of territory. So, well,
Yeah.
thank you for inviting me, and thank you for your ongoing, really, really skillful work with Awaken
Thank you.
Pittsburgh and all of the children and communities that you support. Really incredible work. So thank you.
Thank you, Adam. And to be continued, I hope.